President. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you this morning. My submission set out briefly some of the adverse impacts on the local area of the company's proposals, but I won't repeat those points because they've been made eloquently by others. What I'd like to focus on, therefore, is the financial and commercial case. And in doing that, I will draw on my professional experience, both advising on regulation to companies, to regulators and government, because I think this toll inquiry is very akin to the economic regulation of utilities and other transport undertakings, and also drawing on my experience of the financing of infrastructure and assets. I think the first point I'd want to make is that I'm not convinced that the company has really made the case why the tolls, the issue, the level of the tolls and the decision from last time should be reopened. I mean, some of the evidence provided by the company suggested, a couple of bad summers and corporation tax having gone up. Those are normal business risks. And yes, they are downsides, but there are upsides that the company has as well. And in the nature of running a business, you'll have some downsides and you take action to mitigate or alleviate those risks. So I don't think that case has been made. So how would an economic regulator look at this? Well, the first thing they would look at is what should be the revenue. What's the revenue? What's a reasonable assumption to make about that? And I think the consortium and Dr. Langley in his evidence have highlighted just how ultra cautious the assumptions that the company has made and the impact that there would be of more realistic assumptions. And I would echo what one of the previous objectors said, where the ferry company has done very little, as far as I can see, to market and boost revenue in the way that you'd expect in order to increase traffic volumes. On the cost side, the regulator would normally expect there to be efficiency improvements built into the cost forecast, and I see relatively scant evidence that that is the case. And then thirdly, the regulator would look at the financing, the return and the cost of capital. And so I'll focus particularly on those areas. Firstly, an asset like this would typically have greater loan finance. Now, I absolutely accept that the 1986 Act limits the amount of borrowing that there can be to the company, and I'll come back to that. But the company asserts, without, as far as I can see, any evidence, that in any case it couldn't borrow more than the limit of just under 5 million. Now, based on my experience and the figures presented by the company, I don't think that is the case. At least 50% of the cost of the ferry could be financed by loan, and I can elaborate on that if required. As others have said, there are potentially other financing options, such as leasing, which have not been explored. And more generally, the way in which the company is just putting forward essentially one financing option, I think is far too narrow. The company's assumptions on interest costs are also at the top end of what's reasonable. The company's assuming it's at bank rate plus 4.5%, 450 basis points, when for projects of this type, a more normal assumption would be 250 to 350 basis points as a margin. So again, it's at the very much at the top end. Similarly, the company asserts what is reasonable in terms of a rate of return, and makes reference to the FTSE 100 return of 6.3%, but says because of marketability, more realistic is 10%. I mean, if one looks at other regulated industries, the accepted rate of return is considerably lower than that, with both water and electricity between 4 and 5%. So I don't think that the company's position on that can be justified. Also, as others have made in their submission, the company's point about lack of dividend fails to take into account the fact that dividends were paid in the first 20 years and there was insufficient money at that point put into the ferry reserve. In fact, building up the equity so there's a more valuable asset is almost part of the company's strategy for getting getting their profit and dividend. They could finance things differently, and the company hasn't seriously looked at that. I think also the way that the company is proposing to finance the ferry, it's not efficient financially, because generally speaking, the building up capital cash reserves is not an efficient way of financing things. Most companies would look to finance their future investment, yes, partly from reserve, but through other mechanisms. And also, it's not fair, as others have said, to put all the burden on the ferry users over the next 10 years, rather than over those who will actually be using the future ferry from 2034. So, in my view, the company hasn't justified reopening the toll arrangement and has used overly conservative assumptions across the board and hasn't explored sufficiently more efficient and fairer financing options. And if I may just make two additional points, perhaps to you directly as Inspector. I accept that you have to deal with the position within the existing legislation, but I think it might be useful if you could make some reference to how the current limit on borrowing that there appears to be is perhaps not the best way forward, but I accept that that is not directly a function of this inquiry. The second point is, if you judge that the various changes in tolls, some of them are required, my personal view is that the priority should be to minimise the impact on the local community, who are most subject to the quasi-monopolistic behaviour of the company. So, in preference, I think there shouldn't be a toll on the road. I think maintaining bulk discounts at their current level, I know they are bulk discounts, not residence discounts, but it's the closest, it's a reasonably close approximation, I think, to residence discounts. They are most reliant on the ferry. The third one is for pedestrians and cyclists, for whom I think going round the harbour is less of an option, and so they are more subject to the tolls. And then the sort of fourth priority would be tolls on other traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Mr. Reynolds? Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a couple of questions on the basis of what you said? You highlighted that 50% of the cost of the ferry could be financed by loan.
In principle, putting to one side the point about the
limits that there is.
Yes, but I was dealing with the point that the ferry company had said it couldn't be, they wouldn't be able to service a higher level than the current limit. But the reason I think that is significant is because, as others have said in their submissions, other financing options have not been, as far as I can see, explored. Whether that is leasing, whether that is other forms of financing arrangements through a split between the asset holding company and an operating company. That may be possible under the legislation, but I'm not a lawyer.
So may I ask some questions? Sorry.
Yes. The second question you had, you've answered it anyway in your response, so I have nothing further. So, Mr. Reynolds, yes.
You say that 50% of the cost of the ferry could be funded by way of a loan in principle.
Mm-hmm.
Have you set out any calculations in your evidence to demonstrate you're working out?
Well, two points on that. One,
can you take me to the page reference if you set that out?
I haven't set that out in the evidence that I supplied. I can set that out in, if you would like it, in a further explanatory note, if that would be helpful.
So
I mean, these basic, if I could just explain in principle how I have done that, which is...
With respect, sorry, it's an entirely new point, which is not prefaced, which could be prefaced, because there's nothing which has been said by the company to cause it to come to the fore. This has always been, if this point was a good point, it existed from the beginning. Obviously, I wanted to introduce evidence.
Chairman, we can't hear. He's gabbling. Can you speak out a bit, please?
Please, I understand you can't hear. Thank you. I take that point. Mr. Reynolds, if you can speak into the microphone, please.
So this is an entirely new point. It should have been set out in evidence so that I could call evidence to respond to it. It's not an evidence point. So I suggest it be set to one side accordingly. It would be unfair on the applicant.
With respect, it's not an entirely new point. I said about in my evidence that gearing of 50% would be possible in my experience. So it is not a new point.
Have you set out any calculations to substantiate it rather than just being a bare assertion?
As I said, I can supply that as an explanatory note to the inspector, if that would be of help.
I don't think an explanatory note is necessary, but if you could just outline for me now.
Oh, yes, of course. So typically, in looking at what the size of the loan that could be serviced, you would look at the debt service cover ratio. You would look at what is the cost in any year of servicing the debt, and that you would compare that with earnings before interest, tax and depreciation, and a normally acceptable cover ratio would be of the order of 1.2. So if you then apply that to the company's own figures, and that is with an interest cost which, in my view, is too high, based on evidence from elsewhere, then that would justify around an 8.5 million loan. So that's how I came up with that estimate.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, that if I may.
Yes.
That 1-to-2 cover ratio,
1.2.
is that, in your experience, derived in respect of regulated companies whose main asset is a bespoke vehicle?
So that ratio is for typical project finance loans would be what one would, and there are similarities between that and the ferry companies. That is what would generally be an acceptable debt service cover ratio.
I see. So that ratio comes from what you described as typical project finance loans, rather than in respect of regulated companies whose main asset is an expensive but bespoke vehicle.
But what I can quote to you is that water company, if you look at the determination of gearing ratios for water companies in Ofwat's recent determination for water companies, there they have gearing ratios of 50 to 55%.
So that's the closest you can get as a water company, by way of analogy.
You've been asking me which comparators I am using, and I'm saying you can do it for a water company, which is a regulated utility, or you can do it for a typical project finance loan, where, as for example, in the past on where there are revenues determined by government, where you are looking at cover ratios of around 1.2.
So may I ask?
Yes, Mr. Dewar.
Thank you. You said that you were going to give. You said that you were giving evidence from your experience advising in regulatory and government areas. Could you tell us, please, your qualifications and experience with specifics so that we can understand where you're coming from?
Okay, so just in terms of my specific qualifications, so I'm a past member of the corporate finance faculty of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, and I'm a past member of the Securities and Investment Institute. I'm a past member not because I've been thrown out from malpractice. I'm a past member because I don't require professional qualification to do what I am currently doing, and so I don't pay the relevant amount, but I've had a long period of experience in that. In terms, so that's on the financing side. And then in relation to my experience with regulated companies and regulation, I have advised electricity companies, I have advised the regulator in relation to both electricity and gas. I have advised the CAA in relation to airports. I have advised the Royal Mail in relation to regulation. And I've also advised governments in the UK and overseas in both the electricity industry, but also telecoms.
And for those of us who are not experienced in finance and accountancy, you were suggesting that projects of the type you were referring to would see a margin, as I understand, on...
So in terms of the margin on, I mean, the company has said that or the accountant said that they were assuming a base rate plus 4.5%. Typically for project finance loans at the moment, you're looking at 2 to 2.5% margin. I accept that this is a smaller project and perhaps some greater risk. So, I mean, there's a limit to how far you can generalise, but in my professional experience, one would be looking at something around 2.5 to 3.5 rather than 4.5.
And just so that I can be sure I understood, that was what you were talking about when you were giving us a range of 250 to 350 base points.
Yeah.
You're talking Bank of England base plus 2.5 to 3.5%.
Correct.
Thank you.
Compared to the company's assumption of 4.5.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Reynolds, anything further?
Just to be clear, that was based, as you said, on typical project finance, but you've accepted having unit given that this is much smaller, this is a small project with a bespoke vehicle and is regulated. All of those factors increase the risk and are therefore likely to increase the interest that's demanded.
Yes, as I said, the project finance the bespoke nature of the asset is because project finance it is based on the cash flows rather than the asset itself. So in that respect, it's comparable. I made an adjustment, which is my opinion. But it's an opinion based on long experience. My opinion is that you would be looking at somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 rather than the 4.5 that was quoted in the company's submission.
And in any of those examples that you cited, is it necessary in order to increase or adjust prices in any of those examples to have a public inquiry and therefore for it to be subject to the need to produce evidence and then the decision of an inspector which may or may not favour the increase? Well,
I mean, the process that an economic regulator will go through will be, I mean, it's not as akin to a public inquiry, but the process will be they will get submissions from the company, from others. They will look at those submissions, scrutinise them. In the case of a regulator, they will, for example, do their own scrutiny of what they think the company's cost base should be. They will look at comparators as to what the appropriate rate of return would be, and then come to a judgment. It is a different process, but I think is, in terms of the substance of what needs to be looked at, it is similar.
Don't you agree that the regulation, the fact that there is such a process, will increase the risk, as well as to the small size of the company, but also the regulation, the fact that in order to potentially increase its revenue through tolls, the company has to subject itself to this layer of regulation. That increases the risk that the loan might not be serviced, that there might not be sufficient money to service that.
Well, one could say, in many ways, there are things that may increase the risk, there are things that decrease the risk. They will know that how much they are allowed to increase tolls. And it is the company that has chosen to go to the regulator. Sorry, are you listening? Or?
You give me evidence to the inspector.
Yeah, well, you asked me the question, so I thought you might be interested in the answer.
Please continue.
Yeah. So the point.
Please, I need to listen to the witness. Thank you.
And then, now I've lost my train of thought. Your last question was what?
I think the point is done. Just to correct you if you could turn up bundle 3, page 285, please.
Sorry, which is bundle 3.
It may be that in your hand.
Sorry?
It may be that one in your hand. If you look at the spine.
Oh, yes, it is. Thank you.
Page 285, please.
Yeah.
You 285 and power 47. So you repeatedly said that the company had assumed 450 basis points. Can you say in fact that the company has assumed 4%?
Well, it says 4% there, elsewhere in evidence, and I can't immediately point you to it. Elsewhere in evidence, it has said that it's base rate plus 4.5, which is where I took that from. So it is elsewhere in the evidence. But I see that there it says 4%.
If it's 4%, you say the range can go up to 3.5%, then you accept that there may be there's a difference of 50 basis points, but it's within the range, a reasonable range, is it not?
No, I didn't. When I quoted 250 to 350 basis points, I was taking into account any adjustment for some of the risks that you were referring to. But I absolutely said that says 4%. Elsewhere in documents it says 4.5. But my point remains that a reasonable margin would be somewhere in the range 250 to 350, and you can't get more precise than that because you need to. It depends on the particular market conditions at the time and an assessment overall of the risks. But that's my opinion.
And just to be clear, that is a new point which you've not made in your written evidence. Correct me if I'm wrong. That specific was not made in my written evidence, but that underlies what I did have in my written evidence
concerning what the gearing could be of the company.
Great, no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you.
So can I now ask Mr. Oldham, please?
We have Mr. Brady first.
No, I don't think so. If you're happy to speak now.
Well, good morning. I'm Gavin Oldham, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak at the public inquiry, which I note has received a very large number of objections to the toll review application. And I will concentrate on the two key requests set out in my September 2024 submission, which is detailed on page 420 of the document list. And these are, firstly, that the Department for Transport should reject the motor road toll proposal as set out in section 11 on page 13 of the application. And secondly, that the government should take steps to overhaul the legislation on which the ferry service is based, introducing a much higher degree of public accountability. The road between the entrance to Knoll Beach and Shell Bay is a key thoroughfare for local residents and businesses. As I understand it, the main purpose of the toll road proposal is not just to raise money, according to their submission, envisaging a relatively modest revenue-raising expectation of £50,000 per annum. Although I noted that one of the residents, one of the speakers at an inquiry session last week said it would cost her alone £1,000 a year for her daily exercise and dog walks, but also to reduce parking in the section in proximity to the holiday beaches. I can understand how the high level of overnight summer holiday parking can hinder the free flow of traffic, and it may be galling for the ferry operator that holiday makers are benefiting from free accommodation for them doing so. But the solution to this is surely to introduce parking charges, not to impose a fee on legitimate road traffic. And in fact, David White has said earlier that this is indeed the purpose, as you seem to accept. Whatever just gestures the ferry company may make to alleviate the burden on local residents, such as, for example, exempting vehicles registered in BH19 postcodes, this element of the proposal will damage businesses such as Shell Bay Restaurant and the Boatyard, and cause distress for residents relying on road access for visits by family and friends. This road may be a private road but in law, but it has been treated as a public road for decades. This has surely established a clear precedent for continued free access. My second request, reflecting the chronic difficulties experienced as a result of having the ferry service being operated under deficient, outdated legislation. During the summer, the prolonged summer 2019 debacle, as a result of the failure of the ferry company to retain an adequate supply of spare parts, I and others worked hard to explore the prospects for establishing a replacement ferry service until their repairs were completed. This involved discussions with the local MP, the harbour master, local councils, and the potential ferry replacement services. In a meeting which included Richard Drax, then MP for South Dorset, Mike Keane, Managing Director of the ferry company, and myself on the 6th of September 2019, and this illustrates the issue of trust to which Adrian Whaley referred earlier. Studland representatives put it to Mr. Keane that residents had a lack of confidence in the management of the ferry by the ferry company. Businesses in Purbeck had suffered major economic hardship during their critical summer season, with falls in revenue of up to 40%, and that 100 days suspension at this time was hugely damaging. That proactive actions were needed to provide an alternative service in the event of a breakdown. A fixed jetty should be put in place in the event of future breakdowns. The date of purchase of a new ferry should be brought forward. A proper functioning ferry was essential for businesses and residents in Studland and Purbeck. And the Act enabling the ferry company should be altered and the service put out to tender, potentially also ending the monopoly on services across the harbour mouth. However, all potential solutions to enable a replacement ferry were blocked by the ferry company, demonstrating the unacceptable level of discretion and control which it wields as a result of a 1923 Act on which its tenure is based. At this 2019 meeting, Studland residents described the ferry as very profitable and said that it had been used as a cash cow by the group for investing in other group businesses other than in building a viable reserve fund for funding a new ferry. Indeed, Roger Tipple made reference to this point earlier on this morning. Richard Drax undertook to meet with Grant Shapps, then Minister of Transport, to explore amending the Act, enabling the ferry company to operate so that the service could be put out to tender. The deficiencies in the Act were clearly evidenced in a letter sent to Richard Drax from the Department for Transport on the 28th of October 2019, pointing out that much of that Act and subsequent acts are permissive rather than directory in character. I'm happy to share that letter with the inquiry if that would be helpful. It is really not acceptable to have this vital public service link for Swanage and Studland operated under antiquated legislation enacted over 100 years ago, indeed at a time when 60% of women were still denied voting rights. Notwithstanding its antiquity, though, I would still note that in section 2.1 of a pre-inquiry note from the Planning Inspectorate, it records the Act, stating that it would be to public and local advantage to construct a motor road, thus evidencing its purpose even then. I therefore request that the inquiry recommends that the government should take steps to overhaul this legislation at the earliest opportunity, and to introduce a process by which applicant companies should be invited to tender bids to operate the ferry for a limited period. 10 years would be appropriate, and to bring the approach road into public ownership. In the interim, and to enable this last purpose to be fast-forwarded, the National Trust should agree to sell the motor road to the local authority at an agreed price, so that it can be transferred to public ownership at the earliest opportunity. If the local authority were to see funding as a change of such a change of ownership as challenging, I'm sure that a fundraising appeal to Purbeck residents would be forthcoming. It's worth pointing out that this might also help with setting aside funds for a replacement ferry. I hope the owners, the National Trust, as the successors to the bank's settlement estates, will concur with these requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eldon. Mr. Reynolds, do you have questions?
No, thank you, sir.
Mr. Eldon, can I just check? You say the National Trust should agree to sell the motor road. Do you know of the National Trust ownership in the area, as including the toll road?
Well, I know the National Trust has inherited the bank's settlement estates going back a very long way. My understanding is, and I'm not an expert on, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that the Act effectively looks to the National Trust as the freehold owner, but the Act has provided this permissive legislation under which the ferry company has operated all this time. But no doubt you'll hear more like that from the National Trust this afternoon.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Reynolds?
So in relation to the legal status, no, thank you. But in relation to the legal status of the road, that was a live issue last time in the previous inquiry, and legal submissions were made, and the inspector made a number of comments and findings. I can append to my closing submissions a brief summary of that. I perhaps needn't go into the detail because it hasn't been matter much debate. No one's raised it in the objections, but if that would assist you, I can set that out.
I think that would be helpful just because it has now been raised
Yes.
as an ownership issue,
Yes.
and I'd just like clarification if that is possible.
Yes, certainly, no problem.
I'm sure Mr. Reynolds doesn't need the cross-reference, but it would be helpful if that note were to refer to Section 4 of the 1986 Act, vesting the road in the company.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm grateful.
And just for the record, Mr. Oldham has just given me a copy of the letter to Richard Drex MP. Sorry, from the Department of Transport to Richard Drex MP, which I'll put into the library. Thank you. So, we can call the next witness. Is there anyone from the National Trust here? Yes, thank you very much. If you could start off by giving your name and position, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. Please do start.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Street. I am the Senior Estate Manager employed by the National Trust on the Purbeck Estate. Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, registered valuer with over 25 years of valuing property and infrastructure for accounting purposes, including the use of the depreciated replacement cost method employed by the ferry company's valuers, Gerald E. The National Trust does own much of the land surrounding the ferry company's operation. It is a success to the Banks estate, as others have stated, and as such has a long-term interest in how the ferry and the road are managed, including the costs of tolls to use both. The land owned by the National Trust between Knoll Beach, that's Hardy's Road, has been referred to earlier this morning, and Southaven Point is mostly open access land under the Countryside Rights of Way Act 2000. Just to clarify a point that was raised this morning about access. Over 1 million people visit the Studland Peninsula every year, and a significant resident population live within a few miles of the ferry. In the wider context, the ferry remains a significant positive factor to the economic activity and social health of Purbeck and Bournemouth and Poole. Any change of the ability to provide a full year-round affordable service, both for local journeys and the wider visitor economy, would represent a major impact to both. The National Trust has a legal contract with the ferry company, which was part of the settlement, to allow the 1986 ferry bill to proceed through its parliamentary process and become law. Under the original ferry company legislation and as successors to the Banks estate, National Trust employees and contractors have rights to use the road and in certain limited instances the ferry free of charge. Many of the toll concessions currently offered by the applicant do not have any protection in the statutes or the contract. And whilst we are encouraged by the offer of these, we remain concerned that they are discretionary, and obviously I've subsequently seen the letter of undertaking this morning, and could be withdrawn at any time, whereas any maximum charges set out in an order give the applicant a statutory right to charge up to that level when it is set in. We would ask that the inspector notes the legal status of these concessions under the letter submitted this morning in their report to the Minister, if they are not actually included in the draft order. The road toll is a parking charge and is not a parking charge, and references to this should be avoided. As a major employer in the Purbeck area, especially of seasonal staff, the National Trust has found it necessary to invest over £25,000 a year towards the cost of using the ferries to be able to recruit and retain employees. Increases in ferry tolls will impact directly on our ability to afford to continue this support, and consequently our ability to secure enough staff to service visitor needs, especially in the summer. We remain concerned that the current application, which includes the reintroduction of a road toll for the first time in almost 30 years, remains focused, at least in a financial sense, around the costs of operating and replacing the ferry. As such, we consider the full revenue and capital costs of the company's operation have appeared not to be considered in the round. We refer to especially those costs which are likely to be financially significant and incurred up to and around the replacement of the ferry. For instance, the National Trust is already investing significant capital in the mitigation of climate change impacts adjacent to the chain ferry infrastructure, including a multi-million-pound investment at Sandbanks to replace a structure which was seriously damaged by strong tides a few weeks ago. It seems unlikely that the existing slipways, office, workshop and ferry road of the ferry's enterprise will be able to avoid the impact of climate change and the forces of the sea, and yet this is not factored into the financial projections in any detailed way. The introduction of the road toll will create a unique set of operational impacts to the National Trust and an uncertain impact on certain user groups of the land adjacent to the ferry road. With ongoing uncertainty as to how it is intended for the charges to be collected, policed and enforced, it is essential that the applicant continues to engage with everyone so that the users of the road, be they visitors or regular users, get a clear understanding of how and when they will need to pay any new tolls. The discretionary concessions presented by the application over the last few months following the original application, for instance the BH19 resident toll exemption, are welcome, and we have made reference to their form and status earlier. We understand that there are further improvements and refinements that have been introduced, especially in respect of the boundary and scope of the road toll exemption, and we support this. The statutory framework for the ferry and road, including the toll charge inquiry process, was created in the 20th century. Indeed, some of it seems more 19th century at times. The economic and social importance of the service is common ground, and much has been stated about who should pay for future capital investment needed to sustain it. There are distinct parallels in this inquiry with the debate underway in the water sector as to who should provide the capital to invest in the future of a privately owned previously public utility, and what is a reasonable return on investment for private sector owners and investors, especially when private returns seem to be favoured over sustained long-term investments towards major costs. The ferry service has been in the private sector for all of its existence, but we are now faced, due to an outdated statutory framework, with only a few options to provide for funding of major capital investments needed by the company. Each toll inquiry considers financial performance and private returns, with reference to a reasonable return against the net asset value of the company's asset. How the company applies this return is a secondary consideration, and this inquiry has focused on the need to replace the ferry. It is important the inspector notes that after 2034, with a new ferry paid for and in operation, the likelihood of future surplus greatly increases, which we consider creates a significant incentive to secure a strong recommendation for toll increases from the inspector in 2025. I would also wish to point out that there are considerable risks and variables within the medium-term assumptions in the ferry company's case. Our concerns are that as well as this being a ferry-focused application, there remains a reliance on historical technical information within the application, specifically the valuation supporting the calculation of net asset value of the company, which is now almost 10 years old and retains significant assumptions due to the methodology used. In the last inquiry, there was significant discussions as to the ownership of the road, a point that has just been discussed. I note that in the Fair Acres annual report, which is included, and that is in bundle 3 and page 115, and also on page 106, includes a statement on the legal status of the road, which we do not dispute. That goes to the council's view to add that, but it's already existing in the Ferry Acres Group annual report. As a result of the costs and revenue risks and assumptions within the calculation of net asset value, we consider it highly likely that a further inquiry will be needed before any order is raised for a new ferry, and that will be at considerable cost to all involved. We would ask that the inspector's recommendations give a consideration to these risks and variables, and that he attempts to mitigate against the risk for the need for a further inquiry within a short time frame. The current application created a significant public reaction when lodged, and that suggests that the threshold of local affordability is nearly met, and that the impact of price changes to certain groups was underestimated. We suggest that future applications are submitted with a comprehensive advanced programme of community engagement, as it is clear that many objectors have used the inquiry as a means for this as a means to raise concerns. The need for the applicant to rebuild trust with its stakeholders is very clear and has been raised by others and now by us. They need to show that they are maintaining the significant range of discretionary discounts and exemptions, adding to the ferry replacement reserve wherever possible, and considering the other significant future costs that I have alluded to. We recognise that the ferry company has made an effort to engage more in the last few months. This must be sustained, otherwise each subsequent inquiry will be a contentious process that will not satisfy stakeholders' needs, especially given the relatively narrow scope of it, and the fact that there is no other forum where these concerns can be raised. In summary, we consider that there are a number of underlying bigger picture physical and financial issues regarding the chain ferry's medium-term future, which this inquiry has shone a light on. The inspector may consider this not within their detailed scope, but it is a material factor for those living, working and visiting the area where the chain ferry and toll road are a core part of their lives.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reynolds, do you have any questions?
Good afternoon, Mr. Street. If you could turn to bundle 4, page 425, it's partway into the National Trust's first written objection. Bundle 4 is the largest of the bundles. I think it's that in your left hand. I think it's that it's on the table in your left hand.
Bundle 4.
Page 425.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So, all I want to ask you about this is, so you have main bullet points and sub bullet points. It's the second main bullet point, and it's the second sub-bullet point after that second main bullet point. So it's about halfway down the page. The bullet point beginning, the ferry company suggests. Do you see that?
Yep.
So all I want to ask about now is just to help the inspector understand the car parking provision. You said the National Trust car park at Shell Bay has 110 spaces.
Yes.
In addition to that, do you agree that there is a further National Trust car park called the Middle Beach Car Park, which provides access to Knoll Beach?
No, the Middle Beach car park provides access to Middle Beach.
Middle Beach. And is there then a further car park providing access to Knoll Beach?
There is, yes.
What's that called?
Knoll Beach car park.
And are Middle Beach car park and Knoll Beach car park beside one another?
No, they're half a mile apart.
Half a mile apart, okay. And what is Middle Beach car park larger than Shell Bay car park?
Yes.
How many spaces does it have?
I couldn't say, but there's 100, at least 150 in Middle Beach car park, without referring to other information.
And what's the total number of car parking spaces that you have between the three car parks?
I would say, with as an estimate, up to 500, because we have overflow car parks as well. Should the need arise for opening them up, so we would be able to provide for over 500 cars on a busy summer day.
And do you also have a car park called South Beach Car Park?
Yes.
Where is that? Please don't say South Beach.
So that's the car park that people use to walk to Old Harry Rocks, generally in the Banks Arms Park. So it's further south of the area that of the other ones that we described.
And do you agree that a lot of the people who will use the car parks or park in the area in high season in particular will have come across on the ferry?
We don't have any data to provide for that.
You said that once the new ferry is bought, the likelihood of future surpluses, I think you said, greatly increases.
Yes.
Have you carried out any analysis to help you come to that conclusion?
Only that the requirement to pay money into the ferry replacement reserve is removed, so any need to channel money as a result of the purchase price of the ferry goes. So there are figures in the case for how much is needed to be raised over the period between now and then, 6 more million or whatever for the period.
But you'd agree, wouldn't you, that at that point in time when the new ferry is bought, two new costs arise. The first is servicing the loan that will have to be taken out, the cost arising from that, and the second is in an effort to do what is suggested should have been done, is getting the next ferry replacement reserve in order.
If that is the policy of the ferry company at the time, it's not stated as part of the policy now. But you would assume it would be a reasonable thing to do to provide for ongoing major capital costs of the ferry company at all times.
And it is within the ferry company's evidence. Now you make reference to Shell Bay restaurant, and this is at 426. And you say the Shell Bay car park closes after daylight hours during winter. And I think the point is this is good, that the road toll could have an impact on visitors to the Shell Bay restaurant. Just to be clear, Shell Bay restaurant, as you say, is a National Trust tenant. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So the National Trust charges Shell Bay rent?
Appropriate to the tenancy that exists and the investment made by the tenant, yes.
Yes. It's not on a peppercorn rent or whatever, but it's commercial rent that's charged to the tenants.
The buildings and investment were all made by the tenants, so it wasn't a National Trust built asset that was rented out to there's been a cafe and various things there, never built by the National Trust.
But it is rented.
Yes,
You
there
own
is
it.
there is a lease to the Shell Bay.
Yeah. And is it the National Trust that makes decisions about its car parks opening hours?
It is, yeah.
And so would it not be open to the National Trust, if it so wished, to make sure that its car park opening hours marry with the opening hours of its tenant?
That would be at an extra cost to the National Trust, yes. But I think the provision that the objection that we set out here was before the ferry company suggested that the users or the visitors to the Shell Bay restaurant could park on the road for free, the ferry road for free. So this information is somewhat superseded by subsequent changes to the ferry company's discretionary offers.
Understood, so you don't pursue that point?
I feel there is an alternative that's been suggested that would be helpful if it could be secured in perpetuity, yes.
And can you confirm that the National Trust car park at Studland charges £5 for 2 hours and £8 for 4 hours, £12 for 1 day?
I can't without detailed reference to our current charging policy, but I presume that is correct.
Are locals from Studland and Swanage exempt from those charges?
Only National Trust members are exempt from paying
So,
car parking charges.
so locals would not be exempt because they're locals?
I don't think the National Trust would find it very straightforward to apply that across the country of which it provides car parking facilities, no. And it doesn't have local discretion in Purbeck either. That's why
According to its own policies.
its own policy, yes. That's why we promote membership.
Now, you keen to emphasise the financial impact on the National Trust, specifically not on a UK-wide scale, but specifically at this site. What would the impact be on the local National Trust, if I can put it that way, the Studland National Trust site, if the ferry service was discontinued due to an inability to fund a replacement ferry?
Significant from a short-term point of view, with the people that are who work for us, live on the northern side of the ferry. I'm sure after time that would mitigate, but I think, as we've stated, the reason why we invest money in supporting staff to use the ferry is because they are on lower wages and the cost of the ferry is quite significant in their overall financial circumstances of wanting to work for us. So yes, I would say it would be significant, and we have experienced that when the ferry has been out of action due to technical faults.
So it would be difficult for staff, but would probably also impact upon visitor numbers.
Again, it's a very large assumption, but yes, during the winter or when there's a refit, we do see a reduction in people coming to the Studland Peninsula.
I'm grateful I have no further questions.
Just wait a moment, please. So, can I take you to the summary of your rebuttal statement, which you submitted on 10th of January? And as the second bullet point,
is that the overall starts with overall affordability?
No, it starts with it is not clear. Let me get the
bundle 4, page 431. It's the large bundle. That's bundle 4 for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, can you remind me?
Yeah, so the second bullet point says
Yes.
the scope of the inquiry requires the following of clearly defined criteria in the setting of maximum tolls, whereas the overall case for the company now includes many discretionary aspects which do not have clear legal status. Is that last bit? I was just wanting clarification on what you mean by that.
So it goes back to the point where the draft order and then the order actually confirmed by the minister sets out the maximum tolls and doesn't or hasn't in the past applied any discounts or reductions in those or exemptions from tolls. So we have the statutory position where certain user groups, like I've described, National Trust employees are exempt from certain tolls. Certain users are not, so like the users of the Shell Bay car park, National Trust members. There are a number of groups of people who have been suggested will get a discretionary discount. We are not aware of how that can be enshrined. Obviously, there's a letter of undertaking. I'm not aware of its legal status and whether or not, if it had to be withdrawn by the ferry company, for whatever reason, what recourse there would be as a result of that undertaking having to be dropped. So that is why that statement is there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reynolds, do you want to follow up on that, or will you do it with you?
For cross-examination particularly?
No,
So
that's
it
fine.
seems more, I could do it
No, no.
now, but it doesn't seem appropriate.
That's fine, thank you. Okay, so thank you then, Mr. Scott. So it's now 12:22. We have two further witnesses today, Dr. Langley and Mr. Bella. We could call Dr. Langley now. And can you indicate, Dr. Langley, how long your statement is likely to be? How time-wise?
10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Okay, so I think on that basis, I'm inclined to let you make your statement and then start the questioning, cross-examination, rather than breaking for lunch now.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to leave witness on the stand without.
So that question is asking, sorry, I don't want to read through this, but how long that will be. And will it be less than 20 minutes, essentially, as well? Just,
Well, no, I was actually suggesting that.
if that will, if we were to finish at 1, for example, I don't think we will. I think we'll probably have a bit more than that, but I'm not proposing it to be very long.
No. What I wanted to avoid was having Dr. Langley make his statement and then not starting the cross-examination.
I think it could certainly be started, but I suspect it won't.
Yeah, that's
all
fine.
of it.
That's fine. Okay. So, Dr. Langley, when you're ready, please.
My name is Dr. Andy Langley, and I'm a resident in Purbeck, and I have a professional engineering background. And yes, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to comment on and provide my pointers to my evidence. So, my evidence is contained in 3 documents in Inquiry Bundle 4, and they are OBJ 497, OBJ 4971A, and OBJ 4971B. I note that these documents are referred to outside the bundles with slightly different codes, which may cause confusion. I hope my written evidence is clear enough, and I will not address all the issues now, but I'm happy to answer questions on any of it. I will present the following without complicated cross-references unless asked for them. They will be included in my submitted copy. So first I'd like to talk about the target that the ferry company has. A combination of historic underfunding of the ferry replacement reserve, the COVID pandemic, exceptional ferry outages, inflation, the age of the ferry, and a statutory cap on borrowing have engineered a squeeze on cash requirements before 2034. It is a perfect storm, unlikely to be repeated. The Acts of Parliament are constraining the company's options and are clearly outdated. The company and the government will have to address this sooner or later. Within the current constraints, the company needs to increase its cash reserves by at least £8.5 million before 2034. This is significantly higher by about £2.4 million than was expected at the 2020 inquiry because of a management decision to go for a more expensive variant of ferry. The 2019 estimate of ferry cost is based on a diesel-electric version built in the UK. This estimate will be out of date by 2034 as modern technology and foreign shipyards change the options. Perhaps it could be cheaper. So turning now to the risk of failing to achieve that cash target. The company naturally wants a very low risk route to its cash target. That has been achieved by forecasting low future traffic with higher tolls, presuming that the public will be willing to pay whatever is required. This is really the key point. At what point is it unacceptable to set tolls at such a high level that the risk of failure is very remote? Contingency in a plan should not be excessive. A central forecast, the best guess at what will actually happen, should have contingency for unforeseen problems. But a low forecast, meaning a bad, but not improbably bad, outcome, should have little contingency left in it. If things go seriously wrong, the company always has the option to apply again for a revision of tolls. Opinions on future traffic differ, but they are just opinions. The company has at least partly relied upon an incorrect extrapolation of historic data to support a case for lower volumes, and an arbitrary calculation of 25 to 2040 volumes from 2018 and 2024 data. On the other hand, I and the consortium have argued for a slow recovery from the transient shocks between 2018 and 2024. It is too early to see where future traffic might settle. The company's forecast is around 75% of the average from 1998 to 2018, which would certainly be a significant drop if it actually materialises. The company's assumption of future traffic, at several percent below last year's traffic, does seem remarkably pessimistic and looks more like a low rather than a central forecast. As such, it does not warrant much contingency. This uncertainty in future traffic also makes it an unfortunate time to be setting a baseline for all future tolls. The proposed order fixes only one baseline set of tolls and a set of discounts. All the complicated forecasts are just speculation on how that baseline will lead to future revenues. So the baseline is critical. And now just addressing new toll schedules. The company has justified new tolls based on inflation and historic tolls. This is one way to do it, but there there is no right level for tolls, and they need to relate to future needs rather than the past. Discounts have been reduced because the current discounts are held to be unsustainable. Unfortunately, the average price paid per car was calculated by a method that can be very inaccurate, as simple test cases will prove. The alternative method in my original objection does not support the company's conclusion of an unexpected increase in discounted sales. In any case, single ticket sales make up about 80% of the total revenue, so income is not particularly sensitive to changes in the proportion of discount sales. Since the previous inquiry was quite recent, my approach to new tolls was different. It was to keep as close as possible to the 2021 order tolls and discounts. They might be multiplied by a factor to allow for the exceptional recent jump in inflation, or kept at their current levels. The question then was, what level of traffic would be needed to reach the company's cash target? Turning now to the issue of income and profit. There are endless possible combinations of tolls and traffic that will produce some financial target. Once traffic volumes have been forecast, the tolls follow. I have shown one alternative to the company's application with 2021 order tolls and higher traffic levels. It is roughly equivalent financially to the company's revised application, though without a road toll. If more income were needed, the 2021 order tolls could be multiplied by a constant factor, which could be interpreted as a correction for the recent blip in inflation. It is how the proposed inflation linking would have worked if it had already been implemented. The point is that 2021 order tolls could just as easily form the basis of a revised set of tolls, but the traffic assumption always drives the final levels. Some examples of different toll and traffic combinations are quantified in Table 2 of my rebuttal. They show that there are many viable combinations depending on one's view of traffic. The company is profitable in all cases. Turn to the issue now of inflation linking and tolls. The 2020 inquiry arrived at a schedule of fixed tolls after all the evidence had been weighed up by the inspector. At the time, the company agreed that a fixed schedule was clear, transparent and certain. The proposed inflation linking of tolls raises several concerns about the ability of the public and stakeholders to monitor the company performance and, if necessary, challenge tolls. Section 6 of the 1954 Transport Charges Act and a lack of published information would significantly discourage applications by a third party for a revision. Furthermore, inflation linking of tolls addresses only one half of the income equation. If tolls should respond to inflation, they should also respond to variable traffic and other market factors to keep income, and not just tolls, in line with costs. If the inspector finds that inflation linking of tolls is preferable to the current fixed schedule, I ask him also to consider setting a time limit to the inflation, so that a review of the method's success is likely to be triggered in due course. And turning now to the road toll. As proposed, the road toll fails in its objective of removing an implicit subsidy by ferry users to road users. It would actually reverse the subsidy. The proposed toll is disproportionate, unfair, and fraught with implementation difficulties. A road toll would normally be regulated by entry and exit gates, with signage at the upcoming tolled area that can be clearly read from moving vehicles. An escape route is necessary if they do not want to pay the toll. The company does not claim the right to charge for parking, and as far as I know, does not have planning permission for it. But the toll is clearly an implicit parking charge. A road toll should relate to the use of the road as a means of communication and should apply equally to ferry users and road users, as in the 1923 Act. And I haven't had a chance to study the side letter in detail yet, but I would just say my feeling is that the terms of any road toll and administrative fees should be included in the statutory instrument, so they have statutory force. And on the...
Sorry, forgive me, Dr. Lang, can I just ask you to repeat that? I didn't quite catch that.
Sorry,
It was about what should be...
I said the terms of any road toll and administrative fees should be included in the statutory instrument.
Okay.
I'm turning now to returns on cash. The low return on the company's cash deposits is worrying. This is a significant opportunity to increase contingency in the plan or reduce the burden on passengers by reducing tolls. If over £4 million of cash is being held on bank deposit, it suggests that the money is being used for something else. However, Section 18, subsection 2 of the 1956 Act does place restrictions on use by third parties. And I don't know whether what is happening is in line with those restrictions or not. And finally, one closing thought. I agree with the National Trust that if there were a future application by the company, a period of informal engagement with the public and stakeholders before the application was submitted would benefit everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Langley. Mr. Reynolds?
Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Langley. If you could turn up, please, in bundle 4, page 205.
Yep. Okay.
And so, the first question I wanted to ask about is what you said at one. Wait, sorry, not quite on the mic. Is what you say at 1.2 of that page, a new tool schedule. So you say the proofs of evidence also proposed a new tool schedule. Though it is not clear whether it was intended to take precedence, it is assumed not. So to be clear, does it follow from that the concessions, the new tolls and discounts set out in Mr. Thomas's proof of evidence and Mr. Keane's proof of evidence were not used by you to generate your analysis of the proposed tolls that you set out elsewhere in this document?
No, that's not true. I just didn't give them. I must admit, I was confused at exactly what the company's new proposal was, because it didn't clearly state that it was the new application. It was put forward as a proposal, and that word proposal led me to think that actually it wasn't replacing the original application. So therefore I gave the original application more precedence, but nonetheless there are examples later in that document that address the revised tolls.
Yes, so for example, if you turn to, that's still bundle 4, page 217.
Yeah.
So just wait for the inspector. So we have table 2 at the top there. Can I just confirm that the first 4 rows of that table setting out your analysis is all in respect of the original application and not the application that the inspector is now considering, the revised tolls?
That is correct. The
So
bottom line is the one that applies to the revised tolls.
Yes. Now turning to page 184 of the bundle. Now, what you set out for the inspector is what you describe as a comparative model, which, if I understood it, seeks to analyse, in particular, the 2021 order totals by reference to the various assumptions that you set out there. Is that correct? And it seeks to therefore project income, profit, payments into the FR, etc., etc.
It's I suppose in essence, what I was trying to do was create a financial forecast using the 2021 order tolls as the toll schedule, but a different assumption on traffic volumes from what the company was assuming.
Yes. And that's key, isn't it? Because at 6.2, first bullet point, you set out the first of your main assumptions, but it's really the primary assumption, that traffic volumes in each toll category will slowly rebound to the higher of 2024 and 2018 levels as traffic recovers from the COVID dip over the next 10 years. And you say that's assuming about a 1% per average growth rate of traffic, and then thereafter, after those first 10 years, growing at 0.3% per annum.
That is my assumption there.
So your model and the projections it produces depends upon the decrease we've seen in passenger numbers post-COVID simply being a blip, rather than resulting, say, from the permanent changes to ferry users' lifestyles and ways of working?
Well, one way of looking at this is it means that over the next 10 years, the average traffic would amount to something like the average of 2018 and 2024 levels, which is therefore comparable with the levels that were quoted in Mr. Thomas's rebuttal, for example.
Yes, but he doesn't suggest that those projections are likely, quite the opposite. So what I'm asking you is, your assumption is assuming that the current levels are depressed and that they will return to 2018 levels or thereabouts over 10 years.
Yes, that is correct, yes.
What positive evidence do you have to support your assumption that Class F traffic volumes are likely to increase from the 2024 levels to 2018 levels, rather than staying the same, about the same, or decreasing?
Well, of course there is no evidence of what's going to happen in the future. It all comes down to supposition. But if we turn to my rebuttal statement, which is B4. Has anyone got my rebuttal statement? Where's B4? It's about 18204, right? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get the reference.
204.
It starts at 204. If we go to the figure on page 211, right, in figure 211, you see an expanded view of historic data, which is the solid line for cars. This is we'll always look at the category F for cars. And the 3 points in red are the ones that the company proposes to use to estimate the traffic from 2025 to 2020 to 2040. So that turns out to be something like 7% below 2024 values. But from a different perspective, you could argue that the dash-dotted yellow line was equally plausible as a future forecast. And that shows volumes returning back to almost 2018 levels. And then if we look at...
Sorry, 1 second, let me ask you a question and answer.
Sorry, go on.
Do you have any positive evidence based on actual traffic volumes on the ferry post-COVID to support your thesis that there is likely to be 1% per annum growth every year across the next 10 years? Is there any good support for that from that evidence?
No, I don't think there is any evidence one way or the other at the moment. We have one data point, basically. Until we get future traffic volumes actually in, we will not know which way things are really moving. So no, I agree, there is no hard evidence one way or the other.
Well, let's turn to the traffic evidence. So if you could turn to bundle 3 and page 43. Do you have that?
I do, yes.
So everyone's familiar with this evidence, I think, by now, but just by way of refresher, 2018, we can see the year 2017-18, that's the financial year ending 2018, that's the point to which you say across 10 years traffic volumes will return, Class F will return.
That's the pre-COVID data, basically.
Well, that's the point to which you project across 10 years. You say within 10 years, you assume that is where Class F vehicles will be.
Not quite. These are ferry company numbers, ferry office numbers, rather than the traffic numbers that are actually in the accounts. And so there's a difference between the two.
I don't want to get distracted by small details. So what you say is a 1% per annum growth from 2024 levels to 2018 levels on average. That's your premise, isn't it?
Sorry, I didn't understand that question.
You're presuming that going from starting in 2024 levels, Class F, we will get back to 2018 levels across 10 years, which is about 1% per annum growth.
Yes.
You said that in terms. It's really a difficult question. Now, in year end in 2019, you can see the numbers lower. Just this is simply this is the inspector. That's in relation to the drive shaft failure. This is a question and answer session, so are you able to agree that insofar as you know?
The 2019 point is lower.
Yes. And 1920, that was the drive shaft failure into the beginning of COVID. Do you agree?
Yes.
And then 1921, sorry, I was saying 1920, sorry, the year ending 2021, that was the main COVID year. Do you agree? That covers the periods with
2020 and 2021 were the lowest COVID years, yes.
And then we see, don't we, in the year ending 2022, that the Class F volume is 647,000 thereabouts.
Yes.
And by contrast, if we compare that to 2024, we can see that actually It's about the same, just slightly lower in 2024.
Correct.
So I would suggest to you that rather than being suggestive of there being a post-COVID rebound, the similarity of those figures in 2024 and 2022 suggests that the post-COVID rebound has been and happened and is not ongoing, and that this is instead the new normal post-COVID.
I wouldn't agree entirely with that, because in between we had 2023 when I believe the ferry was damaged and therefore there was a low data point. Now, the unreliability of the service or the service outages does affect people's behaviour as well. So we talk about the COVID dip, but actually the dip is a combination of factors which have more or less coalesced in time. And the consequence of that really hasn't unravelled yet. And while you may be correct that 2022 and 2024 suggest a flattening off of the rebound, that may be true or it may not be true.
Well, you may criticise that the reliance on 2 data points, but what I'm saying is these are the 2 most recent full years, and they support the argument that there's at least a flattening off, rather than your thesis of growth, and you're able to rely on anything post-COVID to support your thesis of growth.
Well, apparently the summer of 2023 was bad, so the 2024 data point was probably low. So
you're saying there is a latent rebound, but it's masked by that wet summer? Is that what you're saying?
I'd say that may be a contributory factor. It just points out that there are many factors that influence where these points lie.
So if you want to explain away 2024 in those terms, the inspector has heard evidence now, and you yourself said it would be helpful to know what's happening in this current year. The inspector's heard evidence that this year to date is about 1% down in 2024, even when one ignores and therefore adjusts for the 2 weeks in December when there was the mini refit. So would that not be a further data point that would tend to support a flattening off, at least, if not a decline, at least a flattening off, rather than in support of your thesis of year-on-year growth from 2024 onwards?
Well, that data hasn't been put into evidence, so I can't really comment on it.
Well, it's being generated as we speak, and we heard oral evidence about it.
And likewise, you know, I pointed out that the passenger ferry data suggested that volumes were recovering at about 1% per annum. If the data for 2025 were actually in evidence, we could all examine them and see whether appropriate corrections have been made.
It's being generated as we speak, so and evidence was given about it on Tuesday and again on Wednesday.
All right. Well, even if we accept that it shows a slight decline on last year's totals, 2 swallows don't make a summer either. I will accept that there could be a flattening off of the curve. I don't accept that the evidence for that is conclusive at the moment. And equally well, you have decided that actually it's going to go significantly worse than that. In fact, 7% below that flattening off. And I in my modelling have presumed that eventually it will shift from where it is today in 10 years' time to a higher level. So we are all just putting forward different suggestions, and I would argue that the evidence for any one of them is not that strong.
Sorry, just to be clear, Dr. Langley, what you just said was that you have assumed that it will shift from where it is today in 10 years' time to a higher level. To be clear, what you, I think, meant to say was you have assumed that in 10 years' time it would, for the first time, exceed even the 2018 levels. Sorry, to be clear, you're not.
No, I'm not saying that.
Well, okay, well then, what you said was you assume that for the first time in 10 years it would exceed where it is today. But I think that's not correct, because you're assuming a 1% per annum growth.
Sorry, it ends up in 28. Sorry, my projection ends up in 2034 at the same level as in 2018. That is approximately, to one significant figure, a 1% per annum growth.
Now, just focusing on that very point now, I've been asking you questions about your assumption that there will be growth, the simple direction, if you like, of movement. Now turning to the gradient of that growth, the rate of growth, the 1%. So to be clear, as you said, one significant figure, you have assumed 1% per annum year-on-year growth. Do you agree that that can be contrasted with even the consortium's most optimistic proposal, which was 0.5% year-on-year growth? Yours is approximately double that growth rate.
If we turn to...
if you're able to give me a yes or no answer to start with, and then you can elaborate, but it's helpful if you know these points.
That is correct. That is correct. And it's clearly, the comparison actually is clearly shown on page 215, 214 perhaps. Yeah, page 214 of the bundle 4. And there you can see, for all its glory, all of the projections that have been put forward, laid out, along with some benchmarks and a linear estimator based on pre-2018 data and the average of 2018 to 2020.
Okay, so it's question and answer. Otherwise this format just doesn't work. What positive support do you rely upon for your 1% per annum growth every year across 10 years?
I don't rely on evidence other than the fact that there has been a transient impact on traffic, which my opinion is that it is on a recovering trajectory, and that assuming it might make its 2018 levels again by 2034 is not unreasonable. Also...
Hang on a second. Question and answer, remember. So, you say, first of all, this is a transient change in the data. That's an assumption, isn't it, that it's transient? It remains to be seen.
No, absolutely not. The COVID pandemic, for example, was definitely a transient event.
We're talking about traffic volume.
Yes.
The reduction is, your argument that the reduction is transient is simply not borne out by the evidence, by the traffic volume evidence. You can't point to any of the data points in support of that.
Oh, I'm sorry, the data points are right on that graph. There was a big dip. There was a big dip around 2020 and 2021, and since then the levels are higher. If that's not evidence of a transient effect, I don't know what is.
As I put to you not 10 minutes ago, the rebound happened in 2022 and is over. That's what the data points suggest, because 2022, 2024 and 2025 are all quite consistent now.
So that was a transient event?
Yes, but it's been and gone, and we are where we are now. But what you said is we're still in this period of transience. I'm suggesting to you that that is not supported by the data point.
Well, the other transient event was the outage in 2023, of course.
But we've excluded that from our discussions for that So you have no positive support for the 1%.
Well,
How have you analysed any data to get to that 1%?
the background population of the country is growing at something between like 0.5 to 0.7% per annum. One might reasonably infer from that there will be a longer term increase in traffic, generally. That would explain maybe half of that 1%, perhaps a third of it. And the balance of that I would put down to the problems that the ferry has encountered and traffic responding to that over a rather long interval.
So the only evidence that you point the inspector to in support of your thesis are national population growth projections?
That plus whatever the consortium has put forward on local road traffic.
What about the Isle of Purbeck? What's population going to do, say, in Swanage and Studland?
Well, Swanage will definitely grow. House building is going on right now.
What about the Isle of Purbeck?
I don't know.
What about the other side of the water?
On Paul and Bournemouth side.
Is the total are you believing to say that the local population is likely, the service by the ferry is going up by reference to any evidence?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Mr. Reynolds, it's now 3 o'clock. Sorry, 1300 hours, 1 o'clock. Is that convenient?
It is, sir.
Pause, okay. So we'll adjourn until 1:45. I just remind you, Dr. Langley, well, I understand, please don't discuss your evidence with everyone else. Thank you very much.